All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you can hear me, if you're out in the lobby and you want to make your way in, we're going to go ahead and get started with a Q&A portion today. First of all, Rich, just want to say thank you for being with us. Thank you for making the trek to Omaha, Nebraska, day post 20-year anniversary. And again, congratulations on that. As Rich was sharing the first couple sessions today, I'm sure there were many questions that you had. I believe there's a phone number that we're going to put on the screen. If there are questions that you want to pose today that you'd like to have answered, the phone number is on the screen. I'll give you a second to get that, put that in your phone. If there are questions you have, again, text those in. We'll make sure and get those to Rich and give him a chance to respond to that. And then after we're done here, you'll have another probably 15 or so minutes before the next session begins. And so just to kind of kick things off, Rich, as you're sharing today, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of slowing down, take time, understanding, even the activations at the end of your sessions. Take 5 minutes and think through these things. A lot of that requires us to be still, to be silent, to quiet the noise around us. As leaders, I know we always have another meeting to get to. Some of us maybe another sermon to write or something to prepare for. The idea of slowing down can seem so counterproductive when looking at the schedule of the day and all the things that we have to get done. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the necessity to slow down and maybe the cost on us internally if we don't.
Yeah, when I think it feels counterproductive, and it's paradoxical. N.T. Wright said in one interview he had, in order to catch up to God, we have to slow down our lives. And it's just and Christianity at its core is paradoxical. If you want to be great, it's got to be least. If you want to be first, it needs to be last. If you want to catch up to God, you have to slow down your life. Because God works and walks at a different pace. It was Kozuke Koyama, who wrote a book called The 3 Mile an Hour God, who talks about the pace that God walks. That the average human walks 3 miles an hour at a leisurely pace. And his claim was that if we're going to walk at the pace of God, it's at that pace that makes margin in our lives. And yet it's very difficult to do this. I recognize the unrelenting pressure. Sundays always come. There are meetings to have, there are problems to attend to, but I think the cost of it is far more dangerous than actually spending the time that we need to do it. Because when we're not spending time in stillness, in silence, in contemplation, in reflection, and I'm not talking about being a monk here. I live in the city that never sleeps. I'm not a monk, although I love the monastery, but I've recognized the value of, there are times I just need to be still, Psalm 46:10, and know that I am God, to gain perspectives. What's my motivation? Why am I doing this? What's really happening beneath the surface of my life around this particular decision? And I think sooner or later, a lack of silence and stillness just catches up with us. And so inner space and outer pace is how I think about the contemplative life. I want to slow down my outer pace so I can pay attention to my inner space. And the last thing I'll just say is, people get really nervous, are you expecting me to take 10 minutes, 20 minutes of just doing nothing? And here's what I would say about that. I would say a little bit in Jesus' hands goes a long way. And so whether he gives a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, he knows how to multiply it. And so 1 minute of saying, I'm going to give my attention to God in this way. I often have a timer on my phone. I'm going to set it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, whatever it is. And then I'm going to go about my business. But I have found it to be an indispensable part of leadership and formation.
That's good. My wife has this phrase. She says, emotions are indicators, not directives. And those emotions come to the surface and we respond and we react. In the reaction inventory, you had one of the points was, what's a counterintuitive act that I need to take? Can you maybe give us some examples of what those counterintuitive acts might be?
For me, when I teach that, so again, what happened? What am I feeling? What's the story I'm telling myself? What's the gospel say? What's the counterintuitive act that's required of me? For me, in many respects, there's one counterintuitive act that I think is applicable to anyone who's trying to work through that, and it is externalizing with someone else what's happening in my own soul. And so I'll give a very practical example. Last year, I volunteered myself to get a 360 evaluation from our board. After offering this, I thought to myself, why would I do this to myself? And so I went to the elders and I said, you know what? We've never done a 360 evaluation on me. And as I hit my 10th year in this role, I think it'd be a good idea. And they were a little too enthusiastic about saying yes. I was like, yeah. I was like, wait a minute, you're a little too happy about this suggestion. And so I did the 360 series of interviews that staff had about what's it like to work with Rich. And I remember our consultant that we hired, he said, Rich, he called me like to prep me. I was like, that can't be a good thing if he's calling me to prep me about the results that are going to come. And he says, there's about a 7-page summary of like things. And so I get the summary and my mind starts scanning for all the negative stuff. That's where I'm scanning for. It's a very vulnerable thing. And so I realize as I'm reading, and by and large, I was actually very encouraged after my initial descent into despair, that most of it was really good, but there were some things that they saw and they pointed out, areas of growth for me. And I had to pay attention to my reactions. What happened? A 360 was done. What am I feeling? Shame, embarrassment, exposed. What's the story I'm telling myself? I'm a crappy pastor. What's the gospel say? God's grace is sufficient. And what's the counterintuitive act for me? Here's what happens with me. When I go down in that space, I can go down a hole pretty quickly. And I can stay there. And typically the story of my life was I go down a hole, and when I'm done coming out of the hole, I come up out of the hole and go to my wife or to some friends. Man, the last couple of weeks were really bad, but I'm feeling great right now. And they're like, you could have invited us into that space. And Rosie's always like, you can invite me. And so I've learned to externalize as I'm in it with some. So in that moment, I went to Rosie and I said, honey, got this 360. I'm reading some of it. I would really appreciate your presence with me. And I'm feeling embarrassed right now. I'm feeling some shame. Can you rub my back as I read the rest of it here? And she's like, all right, whatever, just. And then after that, I was just like, nah, I need more. And so I have 3 friends that I meet with monthly. We've been doing this for 8 years. And I just called them and I said, guys, I'm feeling exposed, embarrassed. And here's what I discovered in just externalizing it. What would have taken me days to process took me hours. And so it's not that I don't go in the hole anymore. I still go in holes. I just don't go as deep and I don't stay as long. And part of it is because the counterintuitive act of externalizing what's going on in me.
And you don't do it solo either. You invite people into that as well
right.
with you. Yeah. For me, I'm an avoider.
Yeah.
And so there was a time in my life where I read Leadership Pain by Sam Chand. And the premise of the book is you will only grow as a leader to the threshold of pain that you can endure. In hard conversations that had been avoided, for me, I wouldn't go into a hole. I would just find something that I win at.
Yeah.
And so I would run to the golf course, or I would go find a quick win to take my mind off the real internal work that I needed to do.
Yeah.
As we talk about differentiation, you had mentioned the 2 polars, right? The immersion, the enmeshment, and then the disconnection, the cutting off. Are there times, or how do you recognize times when a relationship maybe should be disconnected? And a break is healthy? And what's the tension between navigating that tension in a healthy way and when disconnection is needed?
I love that. I mean, in spaces that are teaching, I wish every kind of sermon had a space like this. It's very vulnerable to do that so that some things can be teased out a bit. Because cut off, there are moments when boundaries need to be established, when this relationship can only go so far, that because of the nature of our interaction or the nature of how our conversations have been, it makes sense why we should put a stop here to it. But for me, the way that I think about cutoff and boundaries is essentially this. Is the boundary being established rooted in principle or reactivity? most of the boundaries we put, well, I'm cutting someone off here, or I'm putting distance, it's rooted in reactivity. And so we just automatically put up a boundary as opposed to saying, is there a deeper value and principle that's at work in my life? As opposed to me just through emotionality deciding to put up a boundary here. And so for me, that's the discernment question. Is the boundary I'm establishing here rooted in principle, hopefully shaped by community wisdom, or is it based on my own emotionality and reactivity? And I know how to put a distance myself based on not principle, but because it's uncomfortable, or I don't like that person, or whatever it is. That's how I tend to distinguish appropriate boundaries from like inappropriate ones.
It's good. Question from the audience. What does your daily routine of abiding with Jesus look like? And how do you incorporate a rhythm of abiding with Jesus with your family?
Yeah, for me, I think it varies day to day based on what I'm doing. And so I'm very influenced by the monastic tradition. And at the same time, I recognize I don't live in a monastery. In a monastic tradition, there's set times of prayer, fixed hours of prayer. And while I love to aspire to that, when you have small children, it's just, you're at a different agenda. There's a different, so I have to adjust accordingly. So for me, what it looks like is my go-to approach to abiding with Jesus is contemplative prayer. And what that means for me, very simply, is I take out my phone. I usually have like an app, or I just put my timer. And whether for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, if I want to get ambitious, 15 minutes or 20. But let's just say on average it's 5 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes. And my goal is, I just want to be with Jesus. Lord, here I am. And that's the goal. Not transaction, not here's what I want, but Lord, here I am. And, Andrew Newberg wrote a book called How God Changes Your Brain during neuroscience and prayer and contemplative life. And he talked about the importance of just meditation and silence and contemplation and what it does for our own functioning in the world. And so for me, being with Jesus in that way, I just want to be with you. I don't want to get anything out of it. I want to share presence with you, is my primary way of abiding with Jesus. And from there, it's not that I'm not offering petitions and intercession, but that's how I ground myself in abiding with Jesus. And then I think Scripture's been really important for me as well. And journaling for me, last year, I journaled 5 times last year. And I was actually pretty embarrassed about that because I have stacks of books of journals over the last 25 years. In 2025, I journaled 5 times. So far this year, I've asked God and I've been really committing to abiding with Jesus in this way. And I've already, in January, have journaled more this year than I did all last year. That's become for me a way of attending to what's going on in my soul by paying attention to the words on paper. And so, Francis Bacon once said, writing makes a person more exact. That's a phrase I remember reading from college. And I think that's what it does with our prayers as well. Thank God for the Psalms, where there's an exactness of the soul because we're able to capture them on prayer. That's what abiding looks like for me.
That's good. Thank you. Someone writes in, sounds like, they've done a lot of the work of navigating self-awareness and reactionary awareness, asking for recommendations or tips on how to help a spouse grow in that as well without coming off as trying to fix them.
Yeah. I think this is a universal problem, isn't it? It's invitation versus imposition. It's coercion versus openness. I'm not sure if there is a way to move a spouse in a particular direction except you living with integrity yourself in this space here. And so, one of the phrases we use in our church is that we want to do the best we can to respect the spiritual journey of other people. That someone else's journey is not my journey. And that's really hard because I have a specific goal for my children. I have a specific goal for my wife. I have a plan and a will for everyone's life in my church. A good plan, I think. And yet, lots of folks don't live according to my good plan. And so I have to surrender, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done. So for a spouse, I know it's the level of anxiety that we live with is very deep. This is the person we love most, the person we're most proximate to. And yet I wonder how we can live with integrity in our own lives and then gently use invitational language. Hey, would you like to join me? No pressure. Can we experiment with certain things? And the answer is no. The answer is no. You have to surrender that to God. But I think the biggest thing is you modeling and living with integrity in your own life before God.
Somebody asks, where were the good Omaha bagels from? It feels like a key detail that was left out of the story.
Rob John, I didn't get it. So listen, I don't want to bear false witness here.
Archetype? Okay, the answer is archetype.
Now, let me just clarify something here, because I didn't say it was a New York bagel. Where's Phil? Is Phil in the room here? Phil's from New York. Phil's in the back. I see that hand. Phil's in the back there. Phil, I had dinner with Phil yesterday and learned that Phil grew up in Nyack, where I went to a school called Nyack College. So I was like immediately connected. And then Phil, I don't think you'll mind me sharing this, Phil. He came up to me and was like, I don't believe you that there was a good bagel. I was like, I didn't say it was a New York bagel. I just said it was a really good bagel. So archetype, is that what it is?
Archetype.
No good bagel? K-N-O-W. You're welcome.
For those of you that are bagel lovers, maybe you need to check that out. Question, how do you encourage and support hard conversations so your team doesn't live constantly in the, quote, the story we tell ourselves mindset?
How do we encourage hard conversations? Mm-hmm. We use at New Life, this comes out of a tool that we use in emotionally healthy discipleship called the Ladder of Integrity. I want to encourage everyone to look at this tool. Ladder of Integrity. And what this skill is about is essentially trying to identify the values that you carry that are really important to you, that often inform and shape the conversations we have around conflict. And so whenever conflict emerges, it's often because there's a difference in values. And so what the Ladder of Integrity does is it helps you to pay attention. Instead of blaming, instead of talking about process, or focusing more on content, what's the value that's really important to me? And if we can help people pay attention to their own values and their own reactivity and anxiety, then we can get to a place where we're having these conversations. The other thing I would just say, just generally speaking, I've had to work hard as a pastor to normalize conflict, and just as culture. And so whenever we have newcomer lunches and I'm talking to folks about our church, we talk about conflict as often as normative and sometimes as a necessity. And the way I think about that is I say within every relationship, romantic, friendship, church, otherwise, there are usually 3 stages of relationship. Stage 1 is usually the pseudo phase, or if I call it the heavenly phase, where, I meet people who are dating and I love him. Oh, he's amazing. You know his last name? No, but I love him. And it's like you're just smitten with idealism in that space there. And then, so there's the heavenly stage. Stage 2 is the hellish stage, where your expectations, where there's disappointment now. So I know all the people who are new to New Life, because of how they talk about our church. This is the best church ever. I've never been to a church like this in my life. I'm like, you're new here, huh? What a church. And so I'm like, stick around, because we're just like every other church, in that we have broken people that are trying to figure out how to navigate life together. Yeah. And so normalizing that there's idealism, then there's realism, and then there's the holding of the two. There's a hellish stage, the heavenly stage, the hellish stage, and then there's the holding of those tensions. That this church is, we're not fully angels and we're not demons. I don't know what that, angelic demons or demonic, I don't know. But where we're holding that, and so I think that kind of language, like conflict is to be expected in this community. And I think normalizing that actually helps us to have those harder conversations.
That's good. What's something that you've learned in ministry that you had to learn the hard way that you wish you knew earlier when you started?
I think I've just had to learn the hard way. Along those lines, so much of my avoidance around difficult conversations emerged from my inability to pay attention to my family of origin. And so I'll give you a very plain example of this. 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a staff member who, for a number of years, I've had a hard time just being clear about expectations and values. With other people, I could do it, but with this person, I just found it difficult. And the reason I found it difficult, as I was discovering, was because this person reminded me a bit of my mother. And I never had, my mother and I love my mother to this day, I mean, we're very affectionate, but my mom and I have never had really deep conversations or negotiated differences well, or at all. And so, because this person reminded me so much of my mother, I've been avoiding hard conversations with her. Lots of transference happening. And so paying attention to the ways I've been shaped by my family. So 2 weeks ago, I had the conversation. And here's what I discovered. I can do hard things. And not only can I do hard things, for the sake of the church, I need to do hard things. And so it's me getting like the perspective on why have I resisted a conversation like this, get clear, and then I need to have the conversation. And the conversation lasted 5 minutes. And I'm like, 7 years of pain that I could have avoided just in 5 minutes. But I think I just discovered that the ways I've been shaped by my family really sticks with me in some significant ways.
That's good. Question, what if your elder board rejects the validity of the idea of emotional health or the importance of Christian therapy and sees what you're advocating for as a form of humanism or a slippery slope towards relativism?
Yeah, I think senior leadership needs to be able to clarify the theological values. And so it's my responsibility as a senior leader to anchor whatever we do in theological reflection. I don't want to just do this because it's sociologically trendy or psychologically helpful. I want to root this theologically. At the same time, I also want to recognize that truth is to be found in many different places. And that's not an excuse for relativism. It's just recognizing that there's lots of truth to be found in the world. And how can we live in that truth that's, of course, anchored in the scriptures? And so for me, if an elder's having resistance towards that, I think the first conversation is, in my case, for example, like in our case, I could spend another hour talking about all the pain I've had in the last 13 years, negotiating very difficult conversations with elders, and how in the last 7 years, it's been joy. But I'll just mention in our process, whenever we get a new elder on, I made a lot of assumptions about how aligned that person was in terms of our overall theological kind of values. And so I would assume if you're an elder here, you are in line here. And I realized that's not the case. And so 2020, for example, we're a church that talks a lot about racial justice and racial reconciliation. We're going to talk about hard things. And I just assumed that if you've been coming to our church for 10 years, that you're a person who talks about racial justice, that you're with it. And I discovered that's not the case. And so I had to learn the hard way that even in the discernment process before someone becomes an elder, that a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that there's alignment in heart and in theological values around this. Now, if the person is already in there, I think the larger discernment conversation is, how do I, as the lead pastor, offer a theological vision? And if an elder is still not on board, I think the question becomes, does it serve this body of elders in the community as a whole for someone who's not aligned with our overarching theological convictions to remain in this place? And that might be a space for that, not a cutoff, but a necessary ending in that kind of space there. And so I'm not, necessary endings are important. And we have to grieve those losses as they come. Yeah. But I think that's maturity in the process.
That's good. Can you talk more about grieving? Just even as you said that at the end, grieving those losses. What does grief look like how do we properly grieve in a way that is healing and it's healing moving forward rather than just staying living in the past?
I think in some ways grief, the formative exercise I had in college, one of my professors gave me an exercise to write an 8-page grief journal when I was 20, and I missed the assignment because I wasn't paying attention to the real significant losses in my life. And so over the last 27 years, I've had good mentoring around paying attention to the grief, the losses. And for me, I think what that means fundamentally is it's not crying, but it's lifting up our sense of loss, our sense of grief, our sense of disappointment, number one, before God. Where I'm inviting God into my sadness and despair and grief. And as I do that, I think this is the beauty of lament. Lament is about lifting mind and heart before God, including our grief and sadness. And there's something actually healing and redemptive when we do that. There's a mystery to it. If you ever read the Psalms, where the psalmist is in a really bad place. And at the end, he's like, but I praise you, Lord. And I'm like, how did he get there? And I'm not sure how long it took for him to get from, where are you, Lord, to my soul will praise the Lord. Yeah. Maybe that took months. I don't know. But I think the principle is this. As we invite God into the spaces of loss and grief and sadness, and we're honest with God about that, and honest in community, there's a mysterious and redemptive healing presence that he offers us. And for me, that's grieving well. The opposite of not grieving is the reason why there's lots of addictions in the church and addictive behaviors is because leaders are trying to soothe their own pain. Like for me, addictions are not about people, being sinful or whatever. That's part of it. But addictive behavior is someone's attempt to try to survive a moment. So when someone comes up to me and they're like, hey, I'm addicted to this or addicted to that, my first response is not usually like, stop your dirty sins. For me, it's, congratulations, you've learned how to survive. And your approach to survival is leading you down a deeper spiral of sin. And so how can we get to a better place? But any addictive behavior at its core is about self-soothing. And when you don't grieve, you're attempted to self-soothe in ways that actually leads you into deeper darkness.
Yeah. What need is it meeting in your life?
Yeah.
One more question. You speak very well and graciously about social justice on social media. How do you discern the line between something that needs to be said in a pastoral way versus something that you want to say but may not be helpful?
Yeah.
How do you self-censor?
Imperfectly. Even recently, there have been people who have been upset with me on things I've said about ICE and positions I've taken there. I think for me, the tension I live with is I'm a pastor of a local church, and I have a relatively large following of people who look to me. And so the words that I speak, especially on social media, go way beyond my context. And everyone doesn't like that. And so when I post something, I'm primarily thinking about the community that God has entrusted to my care. What needs to be said publicly for the sake of the community that God has entrusted to my care. Secondly, whenever I post on social media, I really have two people in mind. I have my cousin Carmelo, who is not a Christian, who never wants anything to do with Jesus, and my brother Jason, who's deconstructed in some really significant ways. And I want to show them a picture of Christianity that's beautiful and cares about justice. And so when people are upset with me, I'm like, I recognize that, but my intention is to reach my brother and Carmelo and people like that. And so I recognize it's fraught with all challenges here. And so how do I decide? Imperfectly. And then whenever I have to make a public statement or I feel like I need to write a pastoral statement, that's done through a whole process with our elders and pastors that I often write something, pass it through them, they strengthen it for me, and then I throw it out there. So that's been my approach.
It's good. I think we have time for one more question. My oldest son is in the room, 19 years old, Jace. There's my son right there. And we've got a lot of next generation leaders that are here today. What would you say to maybe that generation? How would you encourage them to build rhythms into their life so that it won't just sustain them for a season, but for decades?
Yeah. Back to what I said earlier, it could feel overwhelming to say I have to make all these large adjustments to my life. And I've learned that a little bit done consistently has long-term effect. I've been in physical therapy for the last 2 weeks because of a hip injury. I thought I was 25, and I tried to make a move on the court and realized I'm not 25 anymore. And so hip and groin problems. So the last 2 weeks, I've been doing physical therapy, and the guy's giving me stretches and all the stuff there, and I'm not seeing anything. The first 2 weeks, like I'm not noticing pain changes, and the guy's saying, if you do this little by little, and it was just recently that I'm starting to go, I'm starting to feel like things are turning the corner a little bit here, but it's a little bit every day or every other day, and I think for me the invitation is a little bit in Jesus' hands goes a long way. You might go, I can't pray for an hour. Start with 5 minutes, and here's what begins to happen actually. The more you give yourself to God in that space, the more your soul's going to crave it. Yeah. And the Holy Spirit begins to do in you what you can't do for yourself. And so start where you're at, not where you want to be. Start where you're at and allow God to work in that.
That's good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Did you enjoy that time? Can we put our hands together for Rich and just thank him for being here?
Thank you.
Sharing with us. Hey, listen, you've got 18 more minutes. Our next session begins at 1:30. And so you've got 18 more minutes. If you didn't get a chance to get coneflower out in the lobby, make sure you do. If you already got some and you want seconds, you can go and see if they have any left. Hopefully you didn't take it all because I haven't been out there yet. But you got 18 minutes. Do whatever you need to do. Take some time. Enjoy some fellowship, and then be back in here at 1:30.